welcome to the Amesbury monthly poetry series. Tonight's featured poets are Martha Collins and Charles O. Hartman. We are at the John Greenleaf Whittier Home and Museum, and I'm your host. I'm the current Poet Laureate of Amesbury. My name is Lisa Lucini Phillips. This series and the Amesbury Poet Laureate program are sponsored by the Amesbury Cultural Council and the Whittier Home. As nonprofits, we welcome donations at www.whittierhome.org/support us. Thank you kindly for your consideration. Tonight's reading will be followed by a question and answer session, both of which will be recorded. And then our open mic will follow, which will not be recorded. If you're online and interested in reading, please do drop a comment in the chat. After the open mic, Martha and Charles will have books to sign and sell for those of us who are here. But we'll also drop into the chat ways that you can buy their books online. Okay, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Martha Collins and Charles O. Hartman. I first met Charles when he was teaching poetry at my alma mater, Connecticut College, back in the 80s. Decades passed, and then last May, I spied him at the Mass Poetry Festival in Salem. It was my first poetry festival, having just returned to poetry after a long absence. And I was so thrilled to see you, a familiar and friendly face, as you strolled into the Peabody Essex Museum with Martha, whom I knew by reputation as one of my fellow poets' favorite workshop leaders, but I hadn't yet met you in person. So as I raced up, all excited to say hello to Charles, Martha gave me a hug before she even knew my name. And this remains one of my favorite things about her. Martha is the award-winning author of 11 poetry collections, including most recently Casualty Reports in 2022, and also 5 co-translated collections, including the North American debut of Vietnamese Buddhist monk and activist Thuy Si, and his Dreaming the Mountain, which was co-translated with Nguyen Ba Chun from the Vietnamese. Dreaming the Mountain was a finalist for the 2024 PEN Award for Poetry and Translation. Martha founded the Creative Writing Program at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and for 10 years served as Pauline Delaney Professor of Creative Writing at Oberlin College. She served as a distinguished visiting writer at Cornell University in 2010, and currently teaches and is available for short-term workshops. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and for more about Martha, please visit marthacollinspoet.com. Charles Hartman has published 8 poetry collections, most recently Downfall of a Straight Line, which we have over here for sale, and that just came out this month. Poet and essayist Christopher Merrill praised the poet and the collection, writing, Hartman's singular grasp of musical possibilities is what makes his new collection of poems such a thrilling read. His prior collections include 2008's New and Selected Poems and 2004's Island Poems. He has also authored a textbook, Verse, an Introduction to Prosody, and 3 books of critical prose, Free Verse, Jazz Text, and Virtual Muse. He co-edited the volume on Wendy Baden for the Unsung Masters series. As did Martha.
Yes, as did.
Edits on the fly. That's my favorite kind. Charles is professor and poet in residence emeritus at Connecticut College, and he plays jazz guitar. For more about Charles, please visit charlesohartman.com. Please help me welcome Martha and Charles.
Thank you. I promise, Lisa, that every time I see you, you will get a hug. Yay! Thank you so much. It's so much fun to be here, and it was so much fun to make connections at that poetry festival, because one of my former students is your, I believe, sister-in-law. Have I got that right? Julie is your
Julie Phillips Brown is my cousin.
Your cousin. I knew she was.
Yeah, and Carolyn Oliver is a friend, and we're all in the same
Yeah.
reading,
So
writing group.
all these connections. I mean, it's a small world we all poets live in, and I assume that most of our audience, at least, is in that small world. So it's great to be here. I'm going to start by reading 3 poems from my most recent book, Casualty Reports. They're all, in some sense, elegies. The first one is a personal elegy. Again, later. The person you are trying is not accepting, is not at this time. Please, again. The person you are trying is not in service. Please check that you have. This is your call. Your person is not accepting. Your person is this number. You have not correctly. Your person is a recording. Again later at this time. Not accepting. Thank you. Don't need to keep applauding. The next 2 are about larger issues, elegies for larger things, and also, in a sense, prayers. This one is at the end of a long sequence about coal. My grandfather and great-grandfather were coal miners, and this is the last poem in the sequence. It goes all the way, as you'll see, to the present. Blessing. Where we dug up the graves of black slaves who mined the first coal in Illinois, where we desecrated the graves of indigenous people that covered coal in the Southwest, where we dug up animals, plants in their graves and burned them as oil and gas and coal. There and throughout our earth, let us grieve for the graves we robbed, and then let us bless the graves of the dead that remain, and over them for the living, the wind, the sun. Really don't have to. And the last poem I'll read from this book was written in 2009, and it was during the then siege of Gaza. It's a bit of background on the current situation, but I want to read it for citizen victims of war in Gaza, but also Israel, Sudan, Ukraine, and many other places in the world. For Gaza. For the woman who cooks on a fire of sticks and boards beside her shell of a house, her bag of clothes in a tree. For the 30 dead Samuni family members dug out of the rubble. For the living, including children who clutched dead mothers. For the schools and mosques and homes destroyed by bombs. For the graves disturbed by tanks. For the more than 1,300 dead, including those who walked from their homes as directed with white flags. For those going home to water their trees, lemon and almond and olive, and for those trees. And now I'll turn to the book of translations that Lisa mentioned. These are poems by a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, Toi Si, who, after the war we call the Vietnam War and the civil war that followed, he was imprisoned for 16 years for refusing to take sides in the war and for standing up for human rights and religious freedom, something we can all care a great deal about these days from here. We published this book in May 2023, and he died last November. So I'd like to read just 3 poems in his memory. This is one that he wrote while he was waiting to go to prison. I still wait. I still wait through long, restless nights. Pale green cries sound from the forest edge. In hatred's darkness, there is still love. A star brims like tears beside my lips. I still wait through black windless nights, the pure shimmering black of ancients' eyes. I look deep to lengthen history's path, a river of blood and tears over the land. I still wait to forget the beating waves, the Pacific Ocean, people back and forth. Those who stayed ache in the tyrant's hands, slender reeds weighed down by the sun at dusk. Then, with a frail body, I face prison, fingers tapping time on a mossy wall. Then, my eyes closed, I go to the dream place, like early dew, like lightning, like evening clouds. And two very short poems, which I'll read as one poem, from a sequence called Sleep Talking in Prison. These were originally written in Chinese and translated by my co-translator into Vietnamese. So he is now in prison. Dedication. Two hands lift the prison bowl of rice to dedicate it to the Lord of all. World overflowing with blood and strife, bowl raised as wordless tears fall. And finally, narrow cage. I live in a narrow cage, but I am content. Lighthearted, free, I walk back and forth. I laugh and talk, listening to myself. A long prison day passes as if it were nothing. So, and now I'm going to read some newer poems. The first two, I think I'd better get some. Yeah. Yes. Usually do that. So the first two are, in some sense, about childhood. The first one, as you'll see, I think, is also about race. Coloring in. In the infant's brain, color is seen on the right side. There are no colors, just color. In the child's brain, when colors are given names, they are seen on the left as separate, distinct. In the child's first drawings, air is white, as are the insides of outlined people and things. In the next drawings, color is basic, bright. Yellow is sun, red is house, green is grass. Black sometimes outlines people and things. People are brown or pink or sometimes white, as air is still white. And this next one is spoken in the voice of a child who has some significant relationship to me. Bear. Today, my mother said she was going to talk to Mrs. Nelson. She said she was worried because I was telling lies. But when I told Mrs. Nelson I met a bear in the woods, she smiled. She asked, what kind of bear? And I said, a brown bear. She asked, was the bear nice? And I said, yes. She asked what the bear and I did, and I said, we talked. I said it was just like talking to a friend. She asked, would I tell the class about the bear? I did, and this is sort of what I said. I wonder if my mother would think this is lies. I know Mrs. Nelson doesn't because she said to tell the class. Also, because Mrs. Nelson kind of reminds me of the bear. Maybe she'll tell my mother the bear's okay. And to the extent that that is an autobiographical poem, I should tell you that my mother tells me about going to see, not Mrs. Nelson, but someone else, and told her that Martha was telling lies. And the teacher said, "Oh, Mrs. Collins, she's not telling lies. She just has an imagination." So would I be a poet today without Mrs. Healy? I'm not sure. This next poem has a bit of childhood in it. The stuff in this poem about birds is true. This is the title poem for the moment of what I'm writing. Collection. Learning lines. Even songbirds learn to sing. They listen to their fathers. We babble our way to syntax. We listen to our mothers. "Oh," said my mother, my first word. Without a father, an isolate song. Without a mother. When I took him to watch the plains, the orphan boy said, "Lane," his sixth word. The songbird teaches his isolate song. His offspring teach the same song. "Erd," said the boy, his third word. But after a few generations, the isolate song begins to revert. "Live and learn," said my father. But after some years, and with no offspring, the woman in the nursing home said nothing but 5, 5. I opened my mouth and sang. The next poem is my only pandemic poem, and it was written, as you can probably tell from the contents, almost exactly 4 years ago. Talking to my neighbors, May 2020. "Hey, red tulip, anthers turned, pistol plumped. Good job." "Deep purple iris, not quite open, but I know what's inside. Ooh, ooh." "Cardinal, thanks for the wolf whistle, the red suit for letting me come so close." Azalea crowds of pink, scarlet, white, no distancing for you. Squirrel chases, pigeon chases, rabbit chases, squirrel, pigeon, rabbit. Slow down, cars. Squirrel imprinted on street, crushed dove. Wind, you're everywhere. No wonder we say breath of God. No, wonder. Getting pretty serious again. The house where I live. If this gray house where I live, house with a white fence and a red door, where I live on the 3rd floor. If this house were in a different country, today I might have watched from my 3rd floor the building across the street explode, hit by a bomb, which in fact might have hit the house where I live, which, if I lived in a different state, might have burst into flames from a wildfire fed by climate change, which, if I lived in a different country, might today have caused floods that might have swept my house away. But as it is, I sit on this 3rd floor in the hottest summer ever recorded and try to keep the air conditioner off while bombs explode and fires and floods surge far from my gray house with its white fence and its red door. And this next poem is so new that it has several titles. It is very much attached to the previous poem. I at some point called it sequel, at some point called it postscript, but I'm going to read it with its current title. If I lived. If I lived in a certain country, near a certain border, I would not live there anymore. And if I lived across that border, I might not live where I once lived. I might not live at all. My friends might not. My house most likely would not be there anymore. And if it was, I would not have enough to eat and drink. I would not have what all must have to live in this world that someday might not be here anymore. Two more poems, one continuing a bit from those two and the other different. Remnant. Dove rowing, wings oars, turning, lifting over this glitter, rubble world gone wrong. No water, food, medicine, fuel. Christmas is canceled in Bethlehem. God is a watering hole, I dreamed. They are bombing everything. Bombing away. Steal away, stole away, home, no, home. Stolen good. Then the rain flooding the tents. Oh, dove. And the last poem, you will see has a companion, which you will hear in a moment. The companion will make it quite clear that the small moon referred to in the end of this poem is one of those little moonlights that is a 3D construction of the moon with its so last poem. Last one up. And then again, as if that tune played on for us. You know the one, the last we played. Turned out the moon was playing too, a big balloon against the busy, foolish sun. That line again, that same old tune. And so it went, with sun at noon and moon at night, till night was done and early sun turned out the moon. By then, though, we'd become immune to shifty time. Once we'd begun, we couldn't stop the throbbing tune our playing made. And in our room, our moon went on it spun, turned on and on our little moon. Our play is done for now, and soon we'll sleep. But first, a task for one, in answer to our one-line tune. Last one up, turns out the moon. Thank you. Charles O. Hartman.
It's very hot, in case you hadn't noticed. I'm going to read exclusively this time from this brand new book, Downfall of the Straight Line, from Arrowsmith Press, which launched on May 5th or 12th, or right? Sometime recently. And I'll begin with the first poem in the book, and I think I'll probably end with the last poem in the book. A glorious sky. The clouds look proud because we have to gape so far up. Really, they're confused and disconcerted, herded, riven with not much time as clouds. How fine that they up there take after us, waiting, demented by brevity, driven askew, evaporating. But what levity, what a view. Second poem is called This Distance, and its subtitle identifies it as being set on Aegina, an island quite close to Athens. If you get on the hydrofoil ferry, it's the first place you come to. People turn up their noses at Aegina because it's just kind of a watery suburb or something. I lived there for most of a year and became very fond of it. This Distance, Aegina. If you think you could hear the heat, it's probably cicadas you're remembering. At this distance, you don't feel it. Don't be ridiculous. But you put together an angle of vision steeply uphill and the raw rub of a backpack you gave up years ago, and crushed sage and time, and you are as there as you habitually are where you are. Down below, the sea must be a bathtub. So small are the boats, the smacks and catches, the ferry leaving along its long curve. The notion that you could be there and here is a difficult and necessary dilemma. As soon as you try to assemble words for it and realize you've taken them from two languages, you've lost it again and hold it as fast as anything, any moment you can grasp. Remembered scars. That's it. Thank you. Remembered Scars, the title that sort of doubles back on itself. On one thigh, the white arc where a wire fence climbed in 8th grade to retrieve a soccer ball exacted penalty not deep but visibly stubborn, stood out against the pallor for 2 decades, or 3. When did I last see it and apologize to the leg or for the leg as its custodian? And then, where my knife whittling the image of a boat slipped and turned up a flap of flesh just above the other knee, the knee declared in sun and pool and bed for more years than I can recall, the knife, the slip. How many years can be recalled, scored as they are? In skin, collagen fibers strew. A scar is where, repairing, they align. A time ago, I saw the marks. Behold me, immaculate, bereft, outliving them. Some of the poems in this book are spoken by persons and things that are not me, which I guess makes them dramatic monologues, but anyway, they're persona poems. And this is pretty clearly one of them. It's called The Pianos, and it has an epigraph from the Grateful Dead. All graceful instruments are known. Later on the same record, they sing all known instruments are graceful. It's a debate we can engage in. Amid so much sleep, we remember the waking phrases, iterations bored or rapturous, resounding hours, rehearsals of the opulent impromptu, the melody sketched by our right hand once and let drop. We almost remember the 100 hands, thousands of operations, fashioning us for the sleek showroom, the dim loft, the highly favored dorm, the not quite defunct club, solarium, atrium. Among us we have taught some children what they are. Whether we're grand, the satin titan with mammoth underbite, or upright, but spinet is an ugly name, everyone has a fall-bored eyelid. We all need work. My felts haven't been pricked for years, the sostenuto's flabby. A long life can be ghastly, last decades in an untunable basement, peeling, untouched even into noise. Once, on a loading dock, Steinway CD 318 and I passed back to back, Gould's own and loaned to Evans. This was before the fall. Another I knew stroked Tatum's fingers, then Peterson's, a junker by then with a fresh coat of paint. When monks burned, everyone went dumb for a day. When I first came home under the round window, even as I heard the truck's pads and dollies tucked back in while guys flexed shoulders for the next, on that still first morning, I answered Bach with Bach, and when at last she stood and away from me to speak to some others, I knew her heart was mine. A slightly longer poem called Peripheral Vision. That's what you could see, what you could barely see out of the corners of your eyes. But a lot of it ends up being about Athens and the essential to life in Athens is the periptero, which is a sort of shack on a corner that sells cigarettes and condoms and maps and God knows what. Peripheral vision. An optometrist told my father his could have made him a great truck driver. They test for that. Around the curve of the century, I see him at it, a violent road volunteer, long haul and lonely. I see him as peripterist, owner of an Athens corner news and sundries hut, vital to daily life, the neighborhood's central intelligence, a veteran among veterans, the wounded and the war widows, ensconced like a fighter pilot behind ranks of magazines and chips, bus tickets and sunglasses, books with the spines outward, goods on the upper slopes heaped at the angle of repose, the least expensive, the most visible. Hunched on the stool in his 2-meter cave, room for one, eyes on everything, manning the panopticon, watchful of wares, purchase port on the swarming street, with side slats to guard first and third base. Shelves inside piled to the apex with condoms and cigarettes, guidebooks in the less demanded languages. Everything in reach. At the back, the hatch. It must have been my father who took me to see Violent Road. My mother wouldn't have. Or was it The Wages of Fear, French with subtitles, which Violent Road remade? In the age of knowledge, no way to know, no one to tell me. I see myself, son and heir, and near double in spirit, as in want of those leather blinders for a horse between shafts, to keep it focused, keep it from being spooked. If only not to remember, only I wander out here, street legal, with no commodities, footloose, or as they call it, free. Those birds are amazing. Autumn Ordinance. This is built as something like a Homeric simile, just as blah, 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 so blah, blah, blah. Right? Autumn Ordinance. Just as when you keep watch on the ground ahead of where your boots kick up the leaves, the path goes vague and blurred, while If you lift your eyes, the far reach of the trail comes lucid as map. So when you look at tomorrow through next year, the way, otherwise so tangled and burdensome, clears. And if the leaves are, as they likely are, fallen from the trees around you, then you get to look deeper into things than spring allowed. The birthdays of the dead. It is an affront in their land to remind someone of that first exile, because they recollect the sojourn with terror still and regret the loss of it. All those dawns, roads, splinters, whiskeys, and hard chairs, all that fucking and eating and talk. They never talk, since it takes tongue and breath. All that breathing, they say inside themselves when the memorial comes round. Well out of that cadence, they say, all day. No more of those little amnesias, the sleeps. Now they have more than all the time in the world. Someone just across the border has tied 2 fingers together with black thread, not to forget till nightfall and the time to cut it. This one is called A Threshold, and for once the you in the poem means, you. A threshold. When the last of these words fades, where will you go? You'll step outside into the fog that buried the road years ago, where sound dies after a few yards and everything smells mulched. Not that nobody's there. People stumble around selling certificates, grooming their lizards. Only they don't speak or make anything or remember. They breathe fog. Or is the fog inside? Maybe the fields run miles of loam all the way to a city that gleams like a bubble and hums like choirs. Maybe people live out there forever. Donkey in the air. While I stood as usual they added stones to the back of the cart, presumably behind the axle. So, not suddenly, but at some tipping point, the market square began to fall away. Look at that bell tower. Who would have guessed? Meanwhile, the chest, supposed to hang from the firm arch of the spine, ached in harness. The clapper lolled. If I've been sure of anything, it's footing. Now I find less traction than a swimming dog. Could try what the birds do. No. You're gaping. I would too. I have a couple of ideas, which unfortunately involve hands. You capped fool with the camera, why not scurry to unload stones, return me to the useful earth? No, this is too much fun. Snap on, develop, print, make a postcard to amuse your tourists from Pakistan to Naples, till it slips into the fist of a Greek who will do a trick to transpose my hung, ridiculously elevated body into a picture of his own village to shame the locals. Then one of you can turn it into words, also good for bandying about. Always glad to be of whatever service in the quarry of your decades. At last, since nobody wants to deal with me dead, somebody starts lifting off counterweights. No plummet, just hind legs, a little kicking, watch the tail, then 4, back in the belonging dust. That's settled. Choosing sides. Not to go to bed, but to stay the night there. We have to work out who gets which. Whose habits stronger decides, except in the happy case where bents agree. This is universal, yet we have no common language for which is which. North or east won't do. Nearer the bathroom and beside the lamp fall short of the particular variety among beds. We'd like to say just right or left, but whose, and lying face up or down? We figure all this geography out as we must. It may take talk, all to the good being what we do best. I get a pang of familiarity as I read this one, which is called Moonlight. Bless her who blessed us with this gift, this bauble, Pharaoh's paraphrase of Earth's our satellite, a bubble to make your room a fable of seeing through the night. This 3D printed globe, crater by crater true, minutely rough, as is, no doubt, the original to the soft hand of God, hankers to show us. Who knew it was so light, that clinker in the sky, to rest its ounces on a wireframe cube of basswood? Who knew it had a button to switch from gold to rare blue and dim it too? We said this afternoon, looking ahead to night, last up turns out the moon. A sonnet with irregular line lengths, but we know. The time will come, we know, when one of us, catching a summer chill, takes on the full-time, lifelong chore of being ill. Or something sidesteps all that fuss, some blow we won't have leisure to discuss, one absent-minded footfall on a hill, or too close to a cougar's kill. Soon or late, one will prove the obvious. The other, paperwork and speeches done, will come home to the thought of home, wanting a drink, a kiss, not to be there another year or 20. In that too spacious minimum, at least for a time, there will be time to think back over plenty. The last poem in the book. A little myth, I guess, something like that, called I Made a City. I made a city walled in wood and set it in the sea. I named the flood our gravest good and surety. We watched the clouds that are, and read the wind for way, living the near to learn the far of the last day. Storm rains cuneiform on wave recorded our long lore, so all we gave we might yet have if we reached shore. I settled us on the tall hill where wisdom rests her soul, and the owl lit on the old sill and made us whole. Thank you.
Thank you again so much. Another round of applause. And now I guess it's time for Q&A. I have some questions, but I also wanted to open it up to our audience. And if you're online, drop a question in the chat, and we'll try to get to that too. But does anyone? Oh yeah, actually, that would be good. We could also. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, Linda.
How did the two moon poems be so similar?
You want me to tell the story?
Yes, because if you don't, I was
Okay.
hoping someone would ask.
So I'm going to tell the story. So it is under contention who said what. But one of us, late at night, said, last one up turns out the moon. Or last up turns out the moon. And the other one said, that would be a great last line for a poem. And
Assignment.
we met in the hallway with our little notebooks out.
It kind of dovetails with my question, which is.
Do you want to?
Oh, sure. Sorry, it's a little busy now. My question is, how did the two of you meet? Was it working on the Wendy? No. All right, I'm getting out of the way now. Am I allowed to cast that?
42 years ago, Martha and my wife at the time were both fellows in the Bunting Institute.
At Radcliffe.
At Radcliffe, right. And I was on leave from teaching out at the University of Washington. And so we all met, and then time went on, and then she married somebody, and I married somebody
Else.
Yes, not the same person. I don't do stories that kind of thing.
Oh, look at that.
Right. And then one spouse died, and then the other spouse died, and we figured out that since we've been friends for 4 decades, maybe we were good to go. So we went on together, and then the pandemic closed down everything, and we didn't see each other for
10
months.
weeks or something? Yeah.
10 weeks, something like that. Which is not what I would have wished, but it was an odd kind of blessing. I mean, we were both, taking pictures of flowers and sending them to each other and things like that. Is that an adequate account of
That's
is
quite
that our story
adequate.
until now?
That's absolutely right. I will just add one little thing. When I met Charles and his then wife, I thought they were the greatest couple in the world. And I fell in love with them. And I was very sad when they broke up. But that was then.
Thank you for humoring me.
It had to come out.
It had to come out, especially since I think when you were emailing a while back, because I took a class with you on the line, and I think you said something cheeky like, "Oh, and by the way, Charles is my boyfriend." What? How do I respond to that?
Right. Well, we said. Shall I explain how we settled on boyfriend?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I mean, because there's so many terms available, right? And boyfriend has the either advantage or disadvantage of seeming particularly silly to a lot of people. Until you remember the scene in Young Frankenstein.
Boyfriend!
Exactly. When Madame,
What's her name?
if we say it,
With Nay.
yeah, if we say it, the horses would go.
Right.
Luther.
That's right. And
Love Luther.
Frau Blücher. And she says, no, it's true. Say it. Say it. He was my boyfriend. And that seemed adequate, right?
Yes.
That's your explanation. I just thought it was great. This is only, what, the third time we've read together?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I
That's
didn't know
good.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I guess my other question, unless anyone, does anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
So is this a date?
We have a flat tire. It must be. No, really, it's a flat tire.
We do have,
Honey.
yeah, I know, it's my flat tire. But we won't tell you more about that story. Yes.
So I wanted to ask if you write more poems when you travel or when you stay home.
I think we have different answers for that. I write more when I stay home, and
I guess I write more when I travel, but it's a little tricky because really what I mean is I travel and I gather all this crap in my head, and then I get home and sometimes I write it while I'm traveling, but sometimes it gets stored up for years.
and of course, nobody's been traveling a whole lot except us between Connecticut and Massachusetts because we commute. Anybody else? Thank you all for being
Thank
a
you.
great audience.
Okay, and now